Let's study a beautiful mistake. His blind date was table 7. Christopher chose 17. The woman sitting there never bothered to tell him to get up. She was the East Coast's most ruthless executive, a woman whose name rattled stock markets. Her silence destroyed careers, and she had not willingly eaten with a stranger in 4 long years. He was a single dad in a borrowed vest, teaching middle schoolers for a living, and ate dinner with his little girl at 6:30 every night. He had no clue who she was. She had never met anyone who didn't. That was the magical error. That meant everything. One completely wrong table. One guy with 0 to prove, and a powerful woman who had never actually been truly seen. Before this unplanned magic happened, Christopher stood at his bathroom mirror for the 3rd time that night. Fiddling with a necktie he wasn't entirely sure how to knot the right way. Right behind him, glowing in the reflection, his daughter Arya rested on the bed, her small arms wrapped tightly around a plush bunny that survived 4 years of fierce affection and miraculously still held its shape together. She studied him with the sharp, assessing gaze of a 6-year-old, deciding this exact moment demanded her complete professional scrutiny. "You look like Grandpa heading to a wedding," she told him. He just yanked the tie completely off and tossed it over his wooden dresser. "Thanks a lot, Arya. Super helpful." She gave a satisfied little nod and rested her cheek right against the bunny's ear. He studied his reflection once more. That vest was his cousin David's. It was way too broad across the shoulders and awkwardly short in the body. His late wife Claire would have silently handed him another shirt, but she had been gone 3 years now. And he slowly, clumsily learned how to get ready for these types of things alone. His sister Madison had set this whole night up. She rang him 4 different times this past week just to nail down every single detail. And every chat wrapped up with some variation of the exact same warning. Do not spend the entire blind date talking about Claire. He didn't mention how that warning meant she clearly expected him to do exactly that, because honestly, she was totally right. He remembered Claire the same way he breathed air, completely by instinct, entirely unable to quit. Missing her was just part of his DNA now, but he still agreed to go out. He said yes mainly because Madison had begged him. With that fragile, cautious hope you and I use when asking for something we know might backfire. And because he admitted, deep down in the rational corners of his mind, that 4 years of hiding from the world was enough. The sticky note on his dresser read Table 7 Jessica 7 p.m. He shoved it in his pocket, kissed Arya's forehead, told her to behave for her aunt and walked out the door. The dinner spot was called Verano. Christopher paused right in the main entryway for a second, allowing his vision to adjust to the warm amber lighting. He scanned a room built from the ground up to make a very specific crowd feel perfectly, completely at home, while making outsiders painfully aware their clothes were borrowed. Flickering candles, rich mahogany, and a subtle jazz piano purring away gracefully in the back corner. He was the single guy in that entire place wearing a hand-me-down jacket. But here is the beauty of it, he didn't notice, so it never even fazed him. Let's watch this accidental blind date begin. He checked his pocket. Madison's handwriting was messy, looping, and almost completely unreadable. Was the table number 7 or 17? The dim lighting made it an absolute mystery. He held it to the flickering candle. 17, he decided. Pocketing the note, he strolled toward the far corner, walking straight into a beautiful mistake. The woman at that table was already sitting there. Dark hair in a flawless knot, her navy dress pressed without a single chaotic wrinkle. Her rigid posture suggested her shoulders hadn't genuinely relaxed in over 10 perfectly planned years. She glared at her phone, looking like a boss reviewing some very depressing financial numbers. Christopher pulled the chair out and casually sat down. "Sorry I'm late," he smiled. 10 minutes hunting for parking." She glanced up. This was definitely not the guy she had scheduled to meet. Giselle Hartwell, the highly scheduled CEO of Meridian Capital Group, knew this instantly. Her assistant had meticulously booked this exact table 6 weeks ago. Her last willing dinner date with a total stranger happened when she was 34, and briefly, foolishly optimistic about the whole romance concept. She only agreed tonight because Scarlett made the plans before she could invent a logical excuse. And the guy she actually planned to meet, Theodore Voss, a real estate director, recommended by a trusted business connection. His flawless resume proved that, at the very least, they could survive a polite conversation. This man, though, was definitely not Theodore. He had warm eyes and delightfully crooked cuffs. Plus, he apologized for the parking hunt like they were simply old friends grabbing lunch. Giselle stared at this unexpected man for one full second. Now, she usually made ruthless choices in fractions of a second. She completely ignored why she took that extra tiny fraction. Why didn't she correct him? You and I know perfectly planned lives crave beautiful mistakes even if she couldn't articulate it. Giselle Hartwell let the beautiful mistake happen. She actually placed her smartphone face down on the tablecloth. She hadn't done that for anyone in years. Letting her perfect plans fade, she watched him study the dinner menu. Holding it with two hands, he read the first page and made a tiny, barely noticeable gasp. It wasn't an annoying complaint or some dramatic fake gasp just for her. Just a truly honest, private reaction from a regular guy stunned by the outrageous price of a fancy salmon dinner. Flipping the page, his face stayed completely curious and genuine. "Do you visit places like this a lot?" she asked. Meeting her gaze, he said, "No, I teach. My little girl and I usually eat dinner at home around 6:30. No apologies, no trying to impress her, just a simple, beautiful truth he had accepted long ago. Throughout her strict corporate career, people constantly told Giselle something. That she had a scary talent for reading anyone instantly and perfectly. For 4 years, she only dealt with business guys using two very specific, predictable tactics: aggressive kissing up or rigidly planned rivalry. You and I know she could easily spot their tired games within the first 90 seconds of any conversation. But this beautiful accident fit neither box. He sat there, beautifully, completely in the present. You and I know blind dates feel scripted, but he asked about her life with pure, honest, entirely unplanned curiosity. He just naturally asked. "Finance," she simply replied. He nodded, genuinely accepting her answer as completely fine, and then he naturally shifted the conversation over to ask whether she had picked this high-end restaurant, or her date. She honestly admitted that it wasn't her choice. He figured it felt like the kind of place you want someone to treat you to, rather than booking yourself. She very nearly agreed aloud. He brought up his daughter Aria, entirely skipping that fake sweetness single dads sometimes use just to score easy points. Instead, he spoke of her as the beautiful, messy center of his whole unplanned daily life. He freely confessed his vest was borrowed and his sister had arranged the night. And that up until 40 minutes ago, he seriously debated bailing on this whole clumsy plan entirely. He laid it all out, totally oblivious that oversharing a messy life on a first date breaks rules. Giselle glanced at her phone, a nervous habit not exactly intentional. Waiting for a text from someone perfectly planned and important. Christopher gently asked. She froze. The question wasn't rude at all, it was true. "No," she answered, "it's just habit. Checking your screen, when you feel out of your depth, with a wonderful stranger." She really looked at him. She truly studied him, realizing this accidental encounter held more promise than the rigid business contracts she usually signed off on. Hunting for that one hidden, imperfect detail that always ends up mattering. He held her gaze calm and steady. But perfect plans always intrude. Theodore Voss arrived at 7:22, instantly sizing up the room. That was Theodore's rigid style. He never really saw the people sitting there. He only cared if the crowd was prestigious enough for his flawless reputation. His suit was immaculate, demanding the kind of careful coordination that hates happy accidents. And his wealth hung in the air, heavy as an expensive, calculated cologne. Always lingering, flawlessly engineered to demand your attention. He gave Christopher a dismissive glance, completely annoyed by this random, unplanned guy in his seat. "Giselle," he stated, "I'm Theodore, so sorry for running late." Then to Christopher, "And who are you?" Christopher pulled a little crumpled scrap of paper from his pocket. He checked the little brass marker near the candle. 17. Checked his sloppy note again. A sharp crease right at the edge had totally hidden the number 1. In the dim, moody light by the entrance, his table 7 was actually the bottom half of 17. The beautiful, life-changing mistake became crystal clear. He got right up. He looked straight into Giselle's eyes, saying, "We usually hide from mistakes," but he looked at her and boldly admitted, "I sat at the wrong table. I am so sorry." Not begging to be forgiven, just owning his beautiful error. Simple and honest, Theodore let out a chuckle. The smug sound of a man forcefully regaining control over a tiny, unpredictable little bump. No big deal, pal. This fancy spot does look a bit outside your typical messy routine anyway. You and I know that tone. Pleasant, sure, but perfectly designed to remind a guy exactly where he ranked. Christopher just turned toward Theodore. One calm, unhurried glance. Then he looked back at Giselle. She wasn't laughing. She hadn't even shifted her gaze toward Theodore. She just kept watching Christopher with that exact same deep attention she'd offered during his whole 20-minute mistake. Her focus hadn't wavered at all. He finally walked across the room to his actual destination, table 7. He didn't look back, but Giselle definitely did. The woman at his real table was Jessica, and she was perfectly nice. But within 15 minutes, both of them knew this planned date wasn't going to lead anywhere at all. It wasn't a terrible time. It was just two people sitting there, unable to find a spark, like running your hand along a dark wall, finding nothing but cold, smooth plaster right where you really expected a switch to be. They even split a dessert. A sweet neither actually wanted. Then they said goodnight, sharing that polite relief of finally escaping a very mild chore. Christopher paused out on the sidewalk in front of Verano, slowly loosening his borrowed tie. The city buzzed around him in its usual Friday night rhythm. Taxis passing, voices drifting, and the heavy thud of live music coming from a few blocks east. He fully intended to walk straight to his parked car. But sometimes perfect plans fail. Walking out, he passed table 17 once more. And he saw Theodore Voss rambling endlessly at the empty air between them, while Giselle sat right across from him, looking very much like someone who was quite skilled at pretending to listen while her mind wandered miles away. Their eyes locked. It lasted just under a second. Christopher lifted his hand in a tiny, awkward wave. The exact gesture people make when they've shared a brief, accidental but truly genuine moment. And neither of them quite knows what to do about it. Before she could even overthink things, Giselle just waved right back. He left, 3 days later. Let's watch how this beautiful mistake unfolds. Christopher sat at his high school desk when a coworker mentioned an article from the morning paper. Meridian Capital Group had just bought a mixed-use building over in the Lakeview district. The exact building housing the Westbridge Academic Foundation, a charity that funded 12 student spots at his school. They'd been working out of that same office for 11 years. Christopher slowly put his pen down. The charity director had already fired off an email. The new owners wanted major changes. Everyone got 60-day notices. They hadn't found any backup location yet. One of those 12 supported kids was a 10th grader named Marcus. His mom worked 2 exhausting jobs, and his brilliant mind really needed space to grow. Christopher had written countless letters, made calls, and waited in administrative offices way past his paid hours. He did this constantly, though none of it was his job. He stared at the email again. The buyout was signed by someone named Giselle Hartwell. He didn't recognize the name. We know how these accidents work. He called Meridian the next morning. A 10 a.m. slot opened Monday on the 34th floor. I grabbed it, walking into the Meridian's towering lobby. The Capitol building was built to silently scream raw power. Endless glass walls and heavy gray stone meant to intimidate. I stepped inside, took a deep breath, and approached reception. Scarlett met me on floor 34. She had that polished look of an assistant playing the second calmest person in any room. Leading me to a boardroom, she promised Miss Hartwell would join me very shortly. She left a water glass without a word, and I took my seat. I opened my folder. 12 simple pages, completely untouched by expensive corporate lawyers. Just me drafting them late at night over 4 days. Foundation history, our student enrollment data, and 2 letters from parents. Plus 1 letter my son Marcus wrote entirely on his own, in handwriting that was honestly much neater than my own. I laid them out in the most honest order possible, and I waited. The door opened. Giselle Hartwell froze. Nothing overly dramatic at all. Just a tiny, barely noticeable pause. Like catching your breath just a single beat too soon. Wearing a charcoal suit, looking just as flawlessly composed as that night at Verano. You and I both know how fast people recover, but if I wasn't watching closely, I'd have missed it. I stood up. Miss Hartwell, I had no idea it was you. She walked to the head of the long table and sat. With one sharp, precise adjustment, she aligned her pen perfectly with her notepad. Why are you here, Mr. Hale? Christopher. I slid the folder gently across. I'll let you read it first. She glanced at the pages. She gave me that exact same look she had given me twice before. Then she opened it up. I stayed completely silent while she read. I didn't try to explain or lean in. I didn't point at any specific details. I just sat there with my hands flat, letting my messy, imperfect paperwork do exactly what it needed to do. She read for 4 whole minutes. I knew because I kept staring at the second hand on the wall clock. You understand? She said, her eyes still glued to that final page, that I get a massive volume of these requests every single month. I understand that, and you showed up anyway. I'm here anyway. She closed the folder, finally looking me right in the eye. Because of 12 students. Because of 12 students. And because you've never had a request from some guy who accidentally crashed your blind date. We sat in silence for 3 seconds. Then Giselle Hartwell smiled. Not that cold, calculated smirk she always wore for corporate boardrooms or perfectly posed financial magazine covers. This was a smaller, unscripted smile, a beautiful slip-up that showed up completely uninvited. Right through the thick glass of that silent conference room. Scarlett watched from outside, genuinely confused. But you and I know, sometimes the best things start as simple mistakes. You see, that unplanned meeting ran 40 minutes late. They discussed renovation timelines and facility relocation feasibility, and how 11 years of roots at one address built community infrastructure you just cannot easily box up. The single father explained it all beautifully, plainly, and Giselle simply sat, listened, and asked questions. Her questions were sharp, aiming to truly understand his struggle. Somewhere along the way, this formal meeting blossomed into a genuine conversation, totally unscripted and unnoticed. Standing to leave, he gathered up his files and politely offered, "Thank you for the time." "You came prepared," she replied to him. That was no ordinary compliment from a corporate executive. It was an honest observation she never actually planned to say aloud. He nodded once and walked out. Theodore Voss discovered the West Bridge situation exactly how guys like him learn about most things. Through a calculated network of professional real estate contacts. Designed perfectly to spy on private rooms he simply had never been invited to step into. Word reached him that Giselle was actually rethinking the Meridian corporate acquisition terms just for a community tenant. And through a second source, he learned more. That the man making this request was the very teacher who had, by sheer meaningless mistake, crashed their blind date at Verano. To a man like Theodore, beautiful accidents do not exist. He built his entire career believing unexpected moments were either tools to use or threats. And this messy mistake did not feel very useful. He called Giselle up the very next afternoon. He kept his voice perfectly smooth, sounding like a friendly colleague offering advice instead of demands. He mentioned hearing about the West Bridge school matter, and just wanted to share his thoughts. He argued that Meridian's stellar reputation relied heavily on sticking to its perfectly laid plans. The market expects absolute predictability. That business choices ignore messy human lives for cold logic. He claimed he would hate to see any random mistake ruin that. Giselle quietly listened, offered a brief thank you, and hung up. Stick with me here. 2 days later, a letter arrived at the administrative office. It originated from a real estate holding company tied directly to Theodore's corporate firm. The note flagged deep concern over a certain faculty member, accusing him of exploiting an accidental dinner encounter with a senior executive for commercial gain. It never named the single father outright, it hardly needed to. The principal called Christopher into his office the following morning. He threw around words like reputational sensitivity, suggesting this unplanned mess required Christopher to step away. Christopher just sank into that cheap plastic chair. Sitting across the desk, he stared at a man he had loyally worked beside for 7 years. He wasn't even angry. He felt a very specific, heavy kind of exhaustion. The weariness of a guy doing good for years, watching a perfect plan twist his honest, accidental connection into something entirely wrong. He calmly said he understood, promising to think it over. He drove home, grabbed little Arya from the neighbor, and boiled up some simple pasta. You and I know what matters. He sat on the floor, admiring her messy, wonderful drawing of a horse and a spaceship. She had drawn an astronaut helmet on her horse. Christopher smiled, seeing a perfectly unplanned solution for a horse floating in outer space. He kept quiet about the strange mix-up of his day. But his mind lingered on Giselle, those 20 mistaken minutes at the wrong table, and that unplanned detour up on the 34th floor. You and I know that rare feeling when a stranger actually listens instead of just waiting to speak. He tried to convince himself it was just a misunderstanding. After years guarding his heart, he figured his loneliness had merely confused basic politeness for a spark of genuine connection. He almost believed that logical lie right as he drifted off to sleep. Across the city in a quiet penthouse. A flawless apartment costing more per foot than his entire monthly paycheck. Giselle stared at her table, an unsigned contract for that massive Meridian building renovation just sitting right there. Scarlett had dropped it off with a tiny simple note. Whenever you are ready, a silver pen lay waiting nearby. She studied those perfectly planned pages for ages. Yet she never picked up the pen. Come Saturday, Christopher walked Arya down to the Calder Street Public Library. The little girl was obsessed with these picture books featuring tiny, brilliant animal detectives. And the crucial 7th volume was finally waiting on hold. She squeezed his hand, happily chattering through all 6 blocks without taking a breath. He listened, smiling and chiming in right on cue. Like always, this simple, unplanned stroll became the absolute highlight of his entire week. Fate steered them past the Meridian Capitol building at 5th and Larkin. Arya froze on the sidewalk, gazing up. She tilted her little head back, tracing the endless glass into the clouds. Does anyone live there, Dad? No, sweetie. People just work there. She pondered that, look so cold. Are the people working there sad? He couldn't quite answer. Let's pause right here with them. He stared up at those sharp, perfect lines and gray glass panels, watching the clouds reflected near the very top. What he completely missed was the lone figure standing just inside that massive lobby glass. Giselle had dragged herself in on a weekend just to grab a meaningless hard copy for a demanding board member. Something only her strict security pass could unlock. She hovered in that empty lobby for barely 3 minutes. Approaching the heavy doors, an unexpected sight outside caught her eye. A quiet father and daughter on the concrete, staring up at her sterile fortress. Recognizing Christopher instantly, she easily could have just walked away. Perfect plans dictated she keep moving. A car was idling and paperwork needed sending immediately. But by pure accident, little Arya turned toward the window. Spotting a woman in a sleek coat, the child threw her hand up and waved with absolutely pure, unhesitating joy. It was the warm, mistaken wave of reuniting with a lifelong friend. Defying logic, Giselle actually waved right back. We have all done this, haven't we? Moving before thinking, realizing the beautiful mistake only after the fact. Christopher spun around. Their eyes locked straight through the barrier. Arya was already cheerfully pointing at him. And then toward Giselle, acting like a tiny accidental matchmaker. Introducing 2 destined strangers she naturally assumed would be friends. Giselle pushed open that door and stepped outside. She had 0 plans for this. You and I know the best things start unplanned. Little Arya stared up, giving her a completely unfiltered, serious look. Christopher instantly knew that face. His daughter had already decided she liked this accidental stranger. You look tired, the girl said. Want to come get ice cream with us? Christopher stopped breathing for a second. Arya. It is true, Arya replied, holding the patient certainty of a kid who wonders why adults constantly overplan things. Giselle stared right at the child. Then over at Christopher. He looked exactly like a single dad caught halfway between total embarrassment and a sudden unplanned spark of hope. This woman had not eaten a single ice cream on a sidewalk since she was 22, but looking at the little girl's stuffed rabbit, she just said, okay. The little parlor was only 3 blocks away, featuring weathered wooden benches painted to look like old sailboats. Arya ordered a pink sprinkle mess, holding it with the extreme caution of a tiny boss guarding a liquid investment. Christopher chose a coffee flavor. Giselle just grabbed vanilla, ignoring her usual careful logic. Sometimes letting go of perfect plans feels pretty amazing. Little Arya ate and chatted in the perfect balance of someone who found both actions equally vital, seeing zero reason not to do them at once. She babbled to Giselle about her space horse drawing. She explained her rabbit, Henry, was officially retired from adventures, but still made sure to attend major social events. She asked if Giselle owned any rabbits. When she admitted she didn't, Arya said that was totally fine. Henry actually felt she seemed like a rabbit person anyway. Giselle glanced at the worn bunny. To its absolute credit, Henry the rabbit appeared deeply attentive. "Your daughter," Giselle murmured softly, as Arya hopped down from the bench to inspect something super interesting near the curb, all under Christopher's watchful gaze. "I know," Christopher sighed. "Usually I can never quiet her down. With most people. She didn't stop with me either," I noticed, a comfortable pause. The afternoon felt perfect. "Let's look closer, because this is where ordinary weekends become unforgettable." It suddenly dawned on Giselle. She hadn't just sat outside on a bench, completely free of any strict agenda, in a very long time. "I owe you an explanation," Christopher finally said. "About dropping the request, you don't. I want to explain it anyway." He stared down at the concrete for a moment, then met her eyes. "I pulled it because someone argued I was dragging you into a terribly difficult spot. I hated doing that, so I just eliminated the problem entirely." Giselle stayed quiet for a heartbeat. "Theodore. I had no idea it involved him." "It came through the school," she nodded. She offered zero extra context, and he knew better than to ask. Sitting at the wrong table taught him a gorgeous lesson. Just like those 40 minutes upstairs did, this woman only ever shared what she wanted. And pushing would only close what this beautiful mistake briefly opened. "Just for the record," he murmured, "I didn't seek out your office because of our accidental blind date mix-up. I came for my 12 students and because the person on that contract was exactly who I needed to speak with. I know, but I just needed to say it clearly." Giselle gave him that same unwavering look she'd shown since their clumsy mix-up, a pure, assessing gaze that never judged or faded. "I know," she repeated softly. "That is exactly why we're meeting." His little girl, Arya, scampered back, climbing right beside Giselle without even asking. She proudly announced she'd found a fascinating crack in the sidewalk, shaped beautifully, like a bunny's ear, and that her dad had fully verified it. Giselle just looked where the child pointed. Beautifully enough, the broken pavement really did look just like a rabbit's ear. Giselle agreed she saw it. Arya gave a firm, satisfied nod. She polished off her ice cream. Without looking up, the child casually reached over, resting her tiny hand on Giselle's arm, that absent, instinctive touch of a kid deciding someone is safe. Then she pulled away and resumed her cone, completely silent. For a long moment Giselle sat perfectly still. "You and I know life's best things come from errors." Giselle felt an emotion she couldn't have even named before that accidental date. Monday crashed into the corporation exactly the way scripted Mondays always did. Fast, heavy, and absolutely ruthless toward anything that wasn't strictly on the flawless schedule. Giselle marched inside at 7:45 and rode the elevator up to 34. She completely ignored everyone until she finished reviewing every piece of morning mail. Then she finally buzzed Scarlett. She called her assistant in, demanding an emergency board meeting for 11 sharp. 7 powerful executives gathered nervously inside the massive corporate conference room. They had all witnessed enough of Giselle's calculated choices to fully understand that an emergency session meant she was about to completely derail their carefully laid, flawless corporate plans. She calmly announced she was rewriting the commercial real estate buyout terms entirely. The Educational Foundation's lease would stay at its exact current rate for 3 more years. The renovation blueprints would be entirely redrawn, intentionally skipping that little foundation's floor. That missing profit would be perfectly balanced by cutting the expensive aesthetic lobby upgrades. After all, that original design budget was ridiculously inflated anyway. 3 different executives voiced their skepticism with sharp, doubtful questions. Giselle countered each one with the icy factual precision that crowned her the youngest CEO ever. She argued that solid community ties were a highly valuable, measurable asset. She also pointed out the initial remodeling budget hid several glaring inefficiencies. She insisted this unscripted choice perfectly aligned with their established framework for stakeholder value. Theodore, sitting in an advisory non-voting seat, He was only there out of polite professional courtesy, but he spoke last. He spoke cautiously, picking his words as delicately as a man selecting a fine tie pin. You have to wonder, was this pure business logic or a beautiful personal choice? Giselle stared right through him. Her tone stayed completely level. Her unbothered posture didn't shift an inch. Let's watch the same woman who had perfectly planned every room and negotiation. Every slight for 11 years, but then she said, "Theodore, you are here as an advisory contact, not a personal advisor. I do not confuse those two roles. I ask you not to either." The entire room went dead silent. Theodore gave a slow nod, staying completely quiet for the rest of the meeting. Afterward, Scarlett stood by the conference doors as the board members filed out and watched Giselle head back to her own office. After 7 years together, she knew Giselle's posture and her exact pace. How she carried her shoulders when a brutal meeting had truly drained her. But today, she walked like someone dropping a heavy burden she had never even planned to carry. Scarlett simply made a brief note in the daily log, writing, "Monday board session." She sat down without adding another word, knowing the most profound shifts in life do not need a paper trail to be real. Giselle shut her office door, sat at her desk, and grabbed her private phone. The exact device meant for everything totally unplanned and unrelated to her business. She tracked down the specific number. Scribbled in her planner margin 3 weeks ago, a random mistake she never called or deleted. 2 rings. Hello, he was obviously caught in the middle of a busy day. You could hear a muffled school hallway behind him, then a door shutting. "The foundation is keeping the building," she said. "Contracts go out tomorrow." A long pause. Then, "Miss Hartwell, Giselle, that is enough." She hung up before either could ruin the beautiful unplanned perfection of that exact moment. She set the phone down gently. She gazed out the window at the city 34 floors down, watching its usual morning rhythm. 10,000 tiny random decisions happening all at once on the ground. She pictured that weird pavement crack shaped just like a rabbit ear. You and I both know this feeling for the first time in forever. Giselle Hartwell did not instantly grab the next formal document on her desk. She sat perfectly still, she breathed. She let that beautiful mistake be the size it truly was. 2 weeks later, Christopher sat at his kitchen table grading persuasive writing assignments after school when an unexpected email arrived from an address he had not saved. He read the message twice. It read, "A new restaurant just opened up near the library on Calder Street. The menu does not seem to feature $200 salmon. Aria is welcome, tell her quickly." There was no signature. He did not need one. He immediately typed back, "She will say yes. I will ask her as a mere formality." He hit send, sitting back. He stared up at his kitchen ceiling for a moment. At the small water stain right by the light. Fixture that he had actually been meaning to fix since last winter. He thought about borrowed vests, crumpled paper, and how sitting at the wrong blind date table can create a more beautiful life than perfectly planned routes. His phone buzzed, one final message from that random address, "Ask her faster." Picture this. He sat laughing alone in his kitchen, grading 8th grade papers. It was that deep, quiet laugh you only get when something feels wonderfully real. His daughter Aria found him sitting right there 30 seconds later. She shuffled out in her socks, simply wanting to know if any leftover pasta remained from the previous night's dinner. "We are getting dinner with someone on Saturday," he announced. She stared back, her face running a complete silent evaluation. "The lady from the building?" "Yeah, the one who agreed with Henry about the crack." "Okay," she gave a nod, highly acceptable. She walked over to the fridge and grabbed the pasta. Tossing over her shoulder, she added, "Henry already likes her. He told me, she told me too." Christopher watched his daughter for a second. This tiny, highly observant person who had dropped into his world and shifted everything around her, much like a tree claiming space. Unforced, never asking permission, just moving with total quiet certainty. "Tell Henry I say thanks," he replied. She nodded, hauling her food back to her room as if this unplanned future was painfully obvious. That diner by the Calder Street Library had that specific heat only great tiny food spots have. Not fake lighting, but real, collected human body heat. The warmth built up from years of locals sharing the exact same tables, celebrating completely normal, everyday moments together. No fancy dress code, no live jazz music playing either. A simple chalkboard held the menu, which they swapped Tuesdays. They both arrived within just 2 minutes of each other. Arya picked her own clothes, sporting a striped top Christopher gave up fighting her on years ago. Giselle walked in wearing a jacket he had never seen. Her hair fell loose the first time he ever noticed. Standing right there, under that specific diner lighting, she looked like a woman deciding to finally take up just a bit more room than she normally would. Their tiny round table had no number at all. They sat. Arya started chattering right away about some wild plot twist in Volume 7 of her animal books. It featured a pelican who looked innocent but absolutely committed the crime. Now you and I know a fake listener, but Giselle tracked the story with real focus. Christopher knew that sincere look from their random run-ins. It was never an act for her. Their meals finally arrived with the slow, relaxed pace of a kitchen that never rushed people out the door. They ate while Arya detailed the pelican's methods. Giselle threw out a question about the bird's alibi so perfectly sharp, Arya actually stopped talking completely. She stared right at her, whispering, "You are good at this." "At what?" Giselle asked, listening. Christopher glanced at his kid. Then he looked at Giselle. She was staring at Arya like a person who was just handed a beautiful gift they never even realized they were desperately waiting for. She murmured quietly, "I am out of practice." "You see, the most beautiful mistakes end like this." Arya just warmly patted her hand. She was wholly sufficient and refused to dwell. "You're doing fine," she whispered, returning to the drawn pelican. Later, Arya fell into that beautiful deep half-sleep unique to a child surviving a long night out, her head resting safely against Christopher's arm. The restaurant grew peaceful around them. Look closely as Giselle stares at the table and admits, 4 years ago, I honestly believed efficiency was the exact same as control, and absolute control meant I was perfectly fine. She refused to look up right away. I was totally wrong about that. I just couldn't imagine making a single mistake without my perfectly planned life crashing to the floor. Christopher didn't rush to fill the heavy silence she left. By now he realized she didn't leave those awkward gaps just so someone could patch them. She left them open to see what happened if someone simply let them breathe. After a pause, he murmured, "You've kept everything standing. It is still standing." "I know, and it will still stand even if you add a beautiful mistake." She finally looked right at him. This single father who wore a borrowed vest mistakenly crashed her table and drove to her office. With 12 handwritten pages, happily eating ice cream on a wooden bench on a Saturday, and never once, not once in any of those messy situations, did he alter his tone based on who she was or what she owned, who simply looked at her under the amber light of a restaurant that mistaken first night, asking if she was okay without needing anything from her answer. "You are incredibly straightforward," she whispered. "Occupational hazard," he gently smiled. "I teach 14-year-olds. You quickly stop hedging." She made a sound resembling a laugh. To him, that tiny loss of perfect control was absolutely one of the best sounds he had heard in a long time. Little Arya shifted against his sleeve, muttered something about that pelican, and settled securely back into sleep. We know Christopher walked into the beautifully wrong restaurant on a chilly November Friday, wearing a borrowed jacket and carrying a meaningless wrong table number. He crashed a blind date with a woman who could have dismissed him in 3 words, but instead generously gave him 20 minutes of her planned life. Then 40 minutes, then an unplanned ice cream bench on a Saturday. Then this unnumbered, mistaken table in a wonderfully warm, small restaurant where absolutely nobody had to pretend for anyone. Giselle had spent 4 years constructing a life so perfectly planned that no unexpected mistake could ever reach her. And then this messy single dad sat right at her table. He didn't know whose it was, but he looked with honest eyes and asked a wonderfully simple question her perfect world never allowed. And suddenly her flawless precision quietly and irreversibly shattered. His daughter Arya just wanted her library book and then some ice cream. She beautifully accomplished both tasks. She had also, with the effortless grace of a child who hadn't learned to fear happy accidents, pointed them right toward this magically correct, unmarked table. We both know beautiful things skip the plan. They just require someone who is willing to make a mistake and stay.